tell you who won't be having a lie-in, and that's, well, certainly Keir Starmer. He's got a big day ahead of him today. And so, of course, has President Zelensky and the other European leaders who are meeting. They're gathering in London for this special defence summit.
Yeah, but Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is going to be there too. He arrived in London yesterday, straight from what has been described as a catastrophic meeting with President Trump at the White House on Friday.
Yeah, and of course, we're seeing pictures at the moment of what was actually a pretty historic meeting. The way Keir Starmer walked out of Number 10 and down the road a little to meet President Zelensky as he got out of his car. And then he pledged then, when they were inside, Keir Starmer pledged the UK's continuing support for Ukraine for as long as it lasts.
Achieve what we both want to achieve, which is a lasting peace for Ukraine based on sovereignty and security for Ukraine.
Well, following the pair's meeting, Chancellor Rachel Reeves signed a £2.26 billion loan agreement with Ukraine to bolster its military capabilities.
And then later today, following the European Leaders' Summit, President Zelensky will head off to Sandringham to meet with King Charles.
Absolute determination to stand with you, unwavering determination, and to achieve what we both want to achieve, which is a lasting peace for Ukraine.
Well, we're joined now by Shadow Minister for Defence, Mark Francois. Mark, good morning to you. What have you made of the Prime Minister's response to kind of the row in the White House, as we call it, on Friday, and how he handled Zelensky yesterday?
Well, I think it is good that the Prime Minister is hosting President Zelensky and other European leaders to discuss where we are with the war in Ukraine. I think it's good that President Zelensky will be there so they can hear it from the horse's mouth, if you like, about what the Ukrainians have had to endure under 3 years of remorseless cruise missile attacks by the Russians, including even against children's hospitals. So it's good if they get that from President Zelensky. And then I presume the Prime Minister will make a statement in Parliament on Monday, both about his trip to the United States and his meetings with President Trump, and about his meeting with Zelensky, and about the outcome of the summit. So Monday in Parliament is likely to be an important day.
Everybody's going to have to watch their P's and Q's, though, aren't they, when they obviously make some sort of statement after today's meeting? Because while they will want to be seen to be doing the heroic thing, if you like, and standing by Ukraine, they're also going to not want to upset clearly very sensitive President Trump.
Well, we actually had a big debate last Thursday in the House of Commons about Ukraine. And there was absolute, unwavering, cross-party support right across the House for Zelensky and for the Ukrainian people. And two key themes emerged from that debate. I was there, I took part in it. And the first theme was there should be no negotiations about the future of Ukraine without Ukraine being directly involved. The whole Commons agreed on that. And the second key theme was that if there is to be a settlement, and we would all like to see the war come to an end, we'd like to see the murder of Ukrainians by Putin cease. But if that is to happen, we cannot allow a settlement that would be on President Putin's terms, because if you do, his tank factories are working free shift. Russia is now an all-out war economy. He would just pocket that, wait a few years, and have another go. And ultimately, the Ukrainians are fighting for our freedom too. They're fighting for democracy. They're fighting for liberty. And if we don't help the Ukrainians stop Putin in Ukraine, then a few years later we'd have to stop him in the Baltic states. And if we didn't stop him there, we'd have to stop him in Poland. And by then, you're into something that would look pretty much like World War III. So far better to back Zelensky and stop Putin coming while we can.
Do you think the United States absolutely have to be involved with the peace in Ukraine? President Trump and those close to him perhaps have threatened pulling out their support for Ukraine. Or do you think Europe as we see 18 European leaders come to London, can go it alone, essentially, to tackle the threats from Russia?
Well, NATO has been the absolute bedrock of our security since shortly after the end of the Second World War. And remember, D-Day itself was an American, British, Canadian operation. So, to my mind, it's vital that we maintain the integrity of NATO. And that means keeping the United States very greatly involved in the security of Europe. What we don't want to do is to have this row, and clearly it was a row, interfere with the long-term stability of NATO. That's a point that Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, was making yesterday. He'll be there at the summit too, as I understand it. He suggested that somehow President Zelensky should try and make it up with President Trump, and let's see whether that proves possible. I hope it does. I mean, I think what happened in the White House was wrong. I think it would have been far better if they'd had those discussions in private.
Yeah.
And then if they wanted to get heated with each other, that necessarily wouldn't have helped President Putin. So, but I think it's ultimately very important that we maintain the integrity of NATO, and that means keeping the United States involved in Europe's defence. And it really matters to America too. Why? When we had that debate on Thursday, the debate was led off brilliantly by Ian Duncan Smith, former soldier, and he made the point that if Putin is seen to win in Ukraine, President Xi in China will conclude the Western democracies are weak, and that will embolden him to try and capture Taiwan. So the way Ian put it was, the road to Taiwan runs through Ukraine. So this is a time for the Western democracies, including the United States, to come together in defense of our values against autocratic leaders, be they in Moscow or Beijing or Tehran.
Very interesting point, though. We must not look weak. You should always go in looking strong, at least. Mark Francois, thanks very much indeed. Let's see what political commentator Piers Pottinger makes of that. We should look strong after today's defence meeting.
Well, it's essential. The problem is that NATO is looking fragile. And everyone also, when talking about NATO, always forgets to bring in the important element, which is the second largest force in NATO is Turkey. Turkey's military force is 3 times the size of the UK and also is well disposed to Putin. Erdogan has cozied up to Putin on more than one occasion, and it is a weak link in the NATO armoury, if it were, because so NATO itself is far from united. Europe is far from united. Most of our leaders in Europe are looking pretty fragile.
Do you think we've been living then for the last 30, 40, 50 years under the misconception that NATO is strong?
Yes. And I think the one thing Trump is right about is people haven't been spending enough on defence. And the one good thing that's come out of all of this so far is that we are now finally committing to it. And in fact, more than this loan, which is very significant to Ukraine, Rachel Reeves has also indicated today that she's going to use the National Wealth Fund, which is £27 billion, to help increase defence spending further and Ukraine further. Now, that's bad news for Ed Miliband, because that National Wealth Fund was there for his mad net zero policies. So there's some significant changes going on very rapidly. And I think Mark Francois is right about Monday. There's going to be an awful lot of questions in the House, because this government is moving quite quickly to change an awful lot of its stances because of the situation they now find themselves in, which is critical. I'm also very, very concerned about bringing our monarch into this. I mean, Starmer thought it was a trump card the day before the Zelensky showdown,
didn't it?
Yeah.
And now it looks like something that's really rather embarrassing. Hence the sudden meeting with Zelensky and our monarch in Sandringham today.
But I mean, Cameron is our royal correspondent as well.
Yes.
I mean, there's no way they're going to rescind the invitation for a second state visit, is there?
There have been calls to do so, but I suspect, I'm sure perhaps you would agree with me, Piers, that they would kick it into the long grass rather than put an actual rubber stamp, we're stopping this state visit.
Absolutely. But, I mean, the monarch is guided by the government. And, I mean, he's seeing Zelensky at the behest of the government. I mean, I hope Zelensky, as it's a beautiful day in Sandringham, gets some time to walk along Hokum Beach and take the air in the beautiful Norfolk countryside.
He needs it.
He needs it, poor chap.
Before, so
but, I mean,
last year.
I mean, to be serious here, bringing our monarch in, who is not supposed to be political, is a very dangerous card to play. He is a ceremonial constitutional head, and to bring him into political matters is a very dangerous precedent.
Well, the government would argue they're using his soft power of diplomacy rather than using him as a political...
Of course. I mean, that was the ploy, but now it doesn't look so clever. Unfortunately, Starmer on Thursday walked into a trap with Trump, and he came back gloating like a Cheshire cat, thinking he had a great success. In fact, he came away with nothing. He achieved nothing.
Did he not have a success in terms of strengthening the relationship between the UK and the US in terms of a potential trade
And there was
deal?
there was almost a promise, wasn't there, from President Trump of no tariffs?
He didn't say that.
No.
And also, I mean, the fact is we don't actually need to do a trade deal with America because we already have a surplus. America is 17% of our trade worldwide. We have a £70 billion surplus in trade with America. If we kept the status quo, it would be fine. It's actually Europe that has the problem with America, not us.
Can we just come back to the NATO point in terms of European nations perhaps not spending enough? Why do you think it's taken President Trump to start banging the drum and saying Europe, UK, we're not paying enough for NATO, we're spending too much money as in the US?
Well, I think the European leaders have for many years sat around being very complacent, enjoying the gravy train of Brussels and Strasbourg, taking enormous salaries for doing absolutely nothing, and it's now all coming home to roost. And the fact is, if I was an American citizen, I'd be pretty proud of Trump because he is putting America first. Everything he's doing is showing that. And I think it's extremely important that we understand that America is now really taking itself seriously in a way that it hasn't for quite a long time. And that is a seismic change, and our leaders in Europe look like a pretty third-rate bunch at the moment.
Well, let's hope they don't this afternoon. Maybe.
Well, if they come up with anything, I'll be amazed.
Well, we'll see. We will see, yeah. They're meeting around about midday, so we'll keep you completely covered on that. Piers, thanks very much indeed. We'll see you again in about an hour's time, I think. Now, our poll of the day is a very moot question, if you like. Here it is. Do you agree with the Prime Minister, as he said to Zelensky yesterday, do you agree with the Prime Minister that Britain stands with Ukraine for as long as it takes? Do you agree?
Yes, so far 27% of you say yes, while 73% of you say no. The final results will be announced later in Nana Okoye's show.
Yes, I think a lot of people have been in touch today saying, hang on a minute, he said he was speaking for the whole of the UK, but he wasn't speaking for me. So it's divided opinion. Anyway, if you want to know any more about all of that or how to vote, gbnews.com/poll.
Well, let's take a look at some other stories coming into the newsroom today. The Vatican has said in the last hour that Pope Francis remains in a stable condition and had a peaceful night and is resting. That's after a health setback this weekend after he suffered an isolated breathing crisis. The Pope was admitted to hospital in Rome on the 14th of February with a severe respiratory infection that triggered other complications, including double pneumonia.
Train fares in England and Wales are going to rise by around 4.6% from today. Rail cards will also rise in cost. It'll cost consumers hundreds of pounds more a year if they're regular commuters. We went out yesterday to ask whether you think our transport system is good value.
Yeah, I do, yeah. Yeah, I think it's pretty good value for what I do every day.
Value for money, wow. With the current service, I would say not.
If the increase actually goes on improving the service is fine, but if it goes to the shareholders, that's another crazy thing. Why are the trains not in completely public ownership?
Israel has agreed to a US proposal to extend the ceasefire in Gaza. The first phase of the ceasefire was due to expire today, but according to the US proposal, the ceasefire will now cover the Ramadan and Passover periods.
And the Met Police have said farmers could be arrested if they drive their tractors to a march in central London scheduled for Tuesday next week. Organisers have said that the so-called Pancake Day rally is aiming to be bigger and better than the previous two demonstrations, and they're campaigning, of course, against changes to those inheritance tax rules. But now conditions have been imposed under the Public Order Act, preventing demonstrators from bringing tractors other than the limited amount already agreed.
It's always quite a sight seeing a load of tractors in central London. Of course, they're usually confined to the countryside, aren't
Well,
they?
there's so much, and you normally only ever see them at a distance, don't you?
Yes.
From the road, and they're there in the field. When you actually see them up close and compared to cars in ordinary roads, they're enormous.
Oh, absolutely. And we've obviously covered extensively on GB News the first two farmers' protests. And we send out reporters, our own presenters, Patrick Christie's and Emily Carver and the rest, and them stood next to these giant
You see
tractors.
how big
I mean,
they
to
are.
climb up 3 or 4 steps to get into the cab to speak to the farmer. It's quite a sight to behold.
And then you're confronted with the fact that, yes, you suddenly, when the farmers talk about the fact that they have to spend a fortune on just their equipment, you see, I mean, those things cost an absolute arm and a leg, don't they?
Hundreds of thousands of pounds for some farming equipment, which very easily racks up to £1 million, which is the threshold for
Especially if you're Jeremy Clarkson and you buy the sort of Ferrari version. Anyway.